I work as a ranch hand in southern Utah. My days consist mainly of fixing fences, feeding cattle, tending to trails, and mainly making sure the land is sufficient to provide for the livestock. Most of you probably don't know, but since the pandemic, there has been a rise in cattle poaching. When a few of our cows went missing, that was exactly what we thought it was. We set up trail cameras around the area to try to catch them, but nothing ever showed up. The weirdest thing we got, though, was when there was a cougar caught on the footage, but after the cougar appeared, there was a gap of a couple hours where the film was nothing but black screen. One of our cattle went missing that day as well, but there's no evidence of what happened. In all, we lost about 3 cows and a bull. It was the third cow that really got me wondering what was going on. The other animals were simply gone. No evidence of what happened to them, but this cow was torn to shreds. Normally, when an animal gets a cow, the stomach will be gone, and some flesh may be on the legs. The rest is left to other animals to pick clean. You can tell the difference from what the predator did and what the carrion cleaners do. This cow, however, was mutilated and skinned. Parts that predators would eat were still there. The throat had been clawed open, and there were some claw marks around the stomach, but most of the meat was still on it, and like I said, its hide was taken clean off. On top of the missing livestock, some of our animals have been sick when before they were perfectly healthy. My horse, Sugar, got cancer and died in 2 months. She had never been sick a day before in her life. She was also fairly young, being only 3 years old. Some of the cows have gotten sick as well. 2 had cancer, and a whole bunch of them got leptospirosis. To say that this has hurt the ranch is an understatement. Normally, leptospirosis is mild and not even detectable without a lab test. But 10 in the herd got it so bad, they had irreversible kidney damage and had to be put down. Fortunately, it seems to have passed. The ranch owner had been making plans to expand the ranch by buying out a few other properties, but after this has happened and the reduction in his herd size, he has since given up that idea. I can't help but to think that somehow, and I'm not sure how, this is all related. This happened to me last August, when I was driving down from Washington to San Diego with some friends. The 3 of us were camping in cool spots along the way, and at one point during our trip, we stopped to camp for a night near the Sierra Nevada mountains. My friend had heard that the sunrise's reflection over the mountains is beautiful, so we decided to wake up around 5 a.m. the next morning to watch. That time came, and we reluctantly left our tent and walked about 10 minutes from our pretty remote campsite over to a long road and a stretch of desert with a great view of the mountains. We stood there for about 20 minutes. Then, as I was looking across the distance, something caught my eye. It seemed to be some type of animal, but a weird size and super white. At first, I thought it was a bunny, but then decided that there was no way for that, as it was way too large. The figure was maybe the size of a large dog, bright white, and moved in kind of an unnatural way, like jerky and fast. I remember the face being really weird, kind of indescribable. It gave me goosebumps as I stared at it, trying to figure out what I was seeing. I looked over to my friends and asked them if they were seeing the thing that I had described. When I looked back, I couldn't see it anymore. Neither of my friends had seen this figure, but they shared a look, and one of them did a motion like 2 fingers walking on his arm. The other nodded, and they told me they didn't know what it was, but we should just go back to our campsite. After that experience, I asked them what they weren't telling me a bunch of times. I kind of thought they were playing a joke on me, but I was still persistent with my questions. They told me to drop it until we made it to San Diego, and promised they would explain it when we got there. A few days later, as we drove into San Diego late at night, I brought it up again. That's when I learned about the Skinwalker for the first time. They told me they've read stories that sound exactly like what I saw, and noted how weird it was that I described the figure like that, without ever having heard of the Skinwalker before. I was so freaked out, and I was glad that they waited to tell me. They told me that they waited to share because they didn't want to risk anything by thinking or talking about it. I'm not sure if I saw a Skinwalker that day, or if maybe my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. I'm just definitely not eager to return to the area anytime soon, though. I live just south of the Grand Canyon, so of course my whole life I've heard tales and rumors of skinwalkers. I thought they were just superstitious fairy tales told by Native Americans, much like European lore of werewolves and other monsters. Anyways, this summer a friend, we'll call him Bert, and I decided to go backcountry camping out in the national forest around here. We packed a few days' supplies and drove out to a pull-off. Then we started walking as deep into the forest as we could go. It was amazing once we were away from the road. There was so much wildlife around us. We saw some elk and deer, and it was very peaceful. The first night out there, we camped in a little clearing we found. The stars were bright and owls were hooting. The next day, we broke camp and went even deeper into the woods. We stopped that night near a rocky outcrop, or more like a rocky shelf. We were so tired we ate a freeze-dried meal, didn't even light a campfire, and went to bed. It was sometime around midnight that Bert shook me awake. He was wide-eyed and generally looked creeped out. I asked him what was wrong, and before he could even answer me, I felt it too. There was something dark in the air. It's hard to explain, but the hairs on the back of my neck were standing straight up. There was something unnatural about the night. No noises like the night before, no crickets or owls. It was dead silent. The wind wasn't even moving. He unzipped the tent and poked his head out. He later said he felt compelled to look around. I poked my head out as well, and that's when I saw it. The moon was full that night, and I could clearly see the silhouette of someone definitely walking upright. By the shape of them, it looked like they were facing us, but they were walking backwards, like they were keeping an eye on us, but retreating. There was definitely something bulky on their shoulders that I think was fur. Next, they ducked down into the tall grass. They must have left on all fours because I could see the grass move, but couldn't see them. After a few minutes more, we both heard the lone howl of a coyote a little ways off. Neither one of us slept the rest of the night. That feeling we had previously had permeated our minds. I'm not 100% sure it was a skinwalker, but tell me, who else would be running around a field at night with animal fur on them, and then run off through tall grass on all fours? It was too small to be a bear, and no animal would walk backwards on two legs. At first light, we broke camp and hoofed it back to town, cutting our trip short by a day. We were both so relieved when we got in the car and headed out. One thing I can say is that when the feeling took over us, it felt like we were somewhere we weren't supposed to be, seeing something we weren't supposed to see. Honestly, I don't think what we saw wanted to hurt us. I think it just wanted us off its land. I was 8 years old when we first moved into the house on the edge of the forest. My parents had their doubts about buying a house with a backyard bordered by the woods. They had concerns about wild animals getting into our bins or hurting our dogs, and were worried one of us might go too far into the trees and get lost. But it was cheap. My dad liked the seclusion, my mom loved the house itself, and my siblings and I were excited about playing in the backyard and exploring the forest. Our first sign that something wasn't right was that our dogs were absolutely terrified of the forest. They never went into the forest for any reason. If a toy they'd been playing with found its way past the tree line, they would refuse to retrieve it. And when one of us went in, they would pace anxiously until we returned. On occasion, we'd notice the dog staring at a spot in the forest in obvious distress. sometimes growling or barking, but we could never see anything there. My brother once carried one of the dogs into the trees to show her there was nothing scary about it, but she wriggled out of his grip and sprinted into the house in a panic. If we were in the backyard when it was getting dark, we sometimes heard noises like someone was walking through the forest, sticks crunching underfoot, branches being pushed aside. If we called out, there was no response, but if we shined a flashlight around, we would occasionally catch a glimpse for just a split second of something that we could swear looked like a person walking around in the dark. My parents quickly banned us from entering the forest at all after dark, and even during the day, we weren't allowed to go out of sight of the house. My sister's bedroom window looked out at the backyard and the forest beyond, and she remembers looking out her window one night and seeing a shadowy figure standing right at the edge of the backyard. She says there was something wrong with it, like it wasn't quite standing on the ground, and it was a little too tall to be a person, and it was sort of distorted, and she was convinced it was staring at her. She called for her dad, saying there was a man in the yard staring at her through the window, and when he ran outside to chase off whoever it was, she continued to watch the figure. It didn't move away, but when the light from our dad's flashlight passed over it, it suddenly just wasn't there anymore. We regularly heard knocking at the back door at night with no one there. Our parents thought it was teenagers playing pranks and stopped bothering even opening the door. Until one rainy night when the knocking was persistent and agitated, my mom pointed out there might be someone needing shelter from the heavy rain outside. But when she opened the door, not only was there no one there, but there were no wet footprints on the porch. The knocking continued the whole time we lived there. It would happen several times in the span of a few weeks, then stop for months, then start up again. My parents eventually installed a security camera, and there was never anyone at the door. The camera wasn't all useless though. About 3 years into living there, my brother started having night terrors and sleepwalking. When he went sleepwalking, he would always go out the back door and start walking towards the forest. My mom, being a super light sleeper, would hear the door open and would run out to get him before he made it into the forest. After the third or fourth time it happened, my brother asked to see the camera footage because he wanted to see how he looked when sleepwalking, I guess thinking it'd look funny. The footage showed him walking out onto the porch, then pausing as if listening to something and shaking his head, then reluctantly walking forward as if being pulled or forcefully guided by something. One evening, my dad was in the backyard, and he heard my sister calling him from the forest, seemingly in distress. Thinking she'd gone exploring in the forest and fallen over and hurt herself, he ran in and started calling to her, but quickly realized it was too dark to see her, and he couldn't pinpoint where her voice was coming from. He told her to wait where she was while he grabbed a flashlight. When he ran back into the house for the flashlight, he saw my sister inside, safe and completely unconcerned. At the time, my dad hadn't told us about hearing my sister's voice in the forest. So when I heard my mom's voice coming from the forest months later while I was outside with the dogs one evening, I didn't question it despite the fact I'd seen my mom inside recently and hadn't noticed her walk past me. My mom was calling to me, saying she'd gotten her sweater caught in some branches and needed me to come in and help her. As I walked in, the dog started barking, alerting my dad, who saw me through the window wandering into the forest. He came outside and called to me, and I said I was just helping my mom. He yelled back that mom was inside, and I needed to run back to the house as fast as I could, which I did. After this, my parents had a fence built around the backyard and started looking for a new place. In the time between the fence being built and us moving out, it got way worse. We'd hear knocking at the door more regularly, as well as tapping on the windows, as if someone was walking the perimeter of the house and trying every window. We would often hear scratching and scraping sounds on the fence and voices beyond it. My brother's night terrors got more frequent, and one night, my mom didn't hear the door open when he went sleepwalking, and he woke up standing at the fence staring into the forest with the dogs barking at him. The last morning we spent there less than 4 years after we had moved in, we woke up to find the back door fully open, and the security camera footage showed it slowly swing open on its own. Since moving out, my brother's sleepwalking has stopped, though he still gets night terrors and he suffers from pretty severe anxiety. A few nights ago, he called me out of the blue, and after a bit of small talk, he asked me if I think the door being open that final night means whatever was out there finally got in. He was trying to make light of it, saying he was getting into the spirit of Halloween, joking about how maybe we should all get exorcised, just in case something latched onto us all those years ago. But I think he's deeply bothered by everything that happened. I know I still am a little. I still get nervous around dark wooded areas. I don't know what I think was out there in the forest behind our house at night, but I get the feeling that, given the chance, it would have swallowed us whole. I work as a lineman, and my territory has me covering parts of the Southwest. My crew was about 20 miles east of Tuba City one day, repairing some line out that way. We often work in isolated areas where power lines run, and this place was no different. It was off some old state highway and down a dirt road in the middle of an open field, with nothing but dead weeds, cactus, and dirt. One guy, Mike, was particularly superstitious and wouldn't shut up about how we were on native ground. He was telling us all some crazy stories he had heard about what happens out there that white people don't know about. When we asked him how he knew about them then, he said that he had heard it from some friends. We all figured his friends were only trying to scare him, and it was no big deal. It was hot that day, being near the end of June. About noon, I was up in the scissor lift working on the line, when I caught the scent of something that smelled like rotting meat. I hollered down to one of the other crew members and asked if they smelled it. They said they did, but it was probably some dead animal somewhere rotting in the heat. Not long after that, a whole flock, or I guess a murder of crows, landed on the line. If I remember correctly, there were about 5 of them or so. This did happen a few years ago, so my memory isn't the best. I kept working, and soon the crows were cawing at me. They seemed intent on cawing specifically at me, not just at random. I swear they were staring at me and cawing for a good 15 minutes, like they were telling me to leave. The smell kept getting stronger as the day went on, and soon the guys at the bottom were asking me to hurry up so we could get out of there, since at least one of the guys was getting sick. I worked as fast as I could, but this isn't a job you can rush. When I was finally done, I called to my crew since they had dispersed, trying to avoid the smell. We packed up and were about to leave when 4 of the crows flew off. One of them flew down and hopped over into some scrub brush. What happened next is what really sent my mind spinning. The rest of these events could have been shrugged off as mere coincidences. But when that crow went to the brush, and then a coyote came out of the same brush and ran a ways away, only to stop and watch us leave, it blew my mind. I still get shivers when I think about that day, and maybe it was all coincidences, but our imagination was on overdrive from the stories Mike had told us. We'll never really know, I guess. When I was young, around 13 to 14 years old, my family bought an old farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. It was a 10-acre lot with woods on the back end that ran well off the property. They were hobby farmers as a side job, and my dad did remote tech work for his main income. Sometimes he would have to fly out to be on site, and those times were the most scary. Even when he was there, we would hear noises at night, wolves howling in the distance, and I would see shadows of things walking around outside my window, especially on full moon nights. More than once or twice when I went into the woods, I swear I saw someone running between trees, but I never got a good look at them. Maybe it was the overactive imagination of a teen, but even my mom was spooked of those woods. Lots of times we lost vegetables from the farm, not eaten by wildlife, but whole patches of them plucked in the middle of the night. No footprints indicating it was a human who had done it. But one time my dad found some large dog prints that he thought was a wolf. No idea why a wolf would want vegetables though. Finally, he put up a fence around the area and put electrical wire around on top. That stopped the vegetables from being taken. We had 3 dogs in the 2 years we lived there. They were never allowed out at night, but 2 of them disappeared without a trace in the middle of the day. The worst thing that I remember happening was one night while trying to sleep, I saw the distinct shadow of a man on my wall. My windows were regular height off the ground, I'd say 4 to 5 feet. I saw the outline of someone's shoulders and head walk past my window. I was scared shitless and huddled under my covers for a few minutes. When I got the courage to look again, I saw the outline one more time, and this time it stopped and I saw the head scan my room. Now, how my room was set up was the door was across from the window and my bed was just to the right of the window. So anyone looking in could only see the foot of my bed, but not me directly, and the shadow they cast was on my sliding closet door. They moved away and I immediately got up and woke my father, telling him that someone was outside. He grabbed his gun and turned on the floodlights we had set up around the house. He later turned them to motion-activated lights, and we didn't have a problem after that, but at this time they were on a switch. So he turned on the lights and went outside. He didn't see anyone on his sweep around the house, but then he turned on his flashlight and shined it at the small barn we had. That's when he saw a lone wolf sneak around to the back of the barn. He took a shot in its direction and it scattered off into the woods. After that night, I never saw anyone sneaking around the house again. We also didn't lose another animal after that night. We moved out of there a year later because there were some other creepy things that happened, like dead animals being dragged right up to our property line, and my mom developed some health issues. Once we moved, her health got better, but that time out there really sets itself apart in my mind as one of the scariest places I have ever lived.